On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World Season 2. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Our first session of the day is Hunted by the Sky, Tanaz Bhathena in conversation with Meenakshi Reddy Madhavan. Tanaz Bhathena, intrepid and inventive author, speaks with fellow writer Meenakshi Reddy about her latest work, Hunted by the Sky. Together, they discuss the creative process of reaching out to young audiences, the overlap of myth and futurism, and the inspirations behind the compelling narrative of Bhathena's new novel. Tanaz Bhathena's write books for young adults. Her latest, Hunted by the Sky, is the first of a young adult fantasy duology set in a world inspired by medieval India, with a sequel, Rising Like a Storm, releasing in June 2021. Her novel, The Beauty of the Moment, won the Nautilus Gold Award for Young Adult Fiction and has also been nominated for the Ontario Library Association's White Pine Award. Menache Reddy Madhavan's first book, You Are Here, was commissioned in 2007 on the basis of a hugely popular blog, Compulsive Confessions. The One Who Had Two Lives is her seventh book and the second in the Girls of the Mahabharata series. She's currently working on a novel set during the COVID lockdown. As you all are aware, all our sessions are available to view on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. In case any of you have bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And in case we drop off, just hang in there. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, Hunted by the Sky, Tanaz Bhathena in conversation with Meenakshi Reddy Madhavan. Meenakshi, Tanaz, over to you.
Hi, Tanaz.
Hi, Meenakshi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing good.
It's weird times we're talking in.
Yeah, I know, right?
But in all this, at least we have good books, and yours among them. I loved it so much. I actually read it before I knew we were going to be in conversation, and I really enjoyed it. I think one of my favorite things was that it was set in medieval India. So I was like, "Ooh, for the first time, a fantasy heroine is wearing a sari. She's eating food that I like to eat, stuff like that." Do you want to quickly describe your book for people who may not have read it?
Sure. So Hunted by the Sky is the first of a YA fantasy duology set in a world inspired by medieval India. The story follows a girl named Gul who is seeking vengeance against a tyrant king for ordering the murder of her parents. Trained in warrior magic by a group of rebel women called the Sisterhood of the Golden Lotus, Gul eventually infiltrates the king's palace with the help of a reluctant stable boy named Kavas, who has some dark secrets of his own.
Kavas is quite sexy, I have to say.
I know.
So, this is quite a shift for you from the previous two books you've written, which were set in Saudi Arabia, I want to say, yes?
Yes.
And were about young women, similar young women, but in the regular world, our world.
Yes. So the first one, A Girl Like That, was set in Saudi Arabia. The second one, The Beauty of the Moment, was set in Canada. And both of them were based on stuff that I knew. So as writers, we often write what we know. And for the longest time, that's what I was writing. Because even though I really, as a kid, wanted to start writing fantasy, it was kind of interesting in that sense. Because when I was 11 years old, the very first story that I wrote was about a werewolf at a girls' boarding school. So this combined my love of R.L. Stine and Enid Blyton together in one mashup. And that's what I was doing. But I never really had the courage to write fantasy, because a lot of the times the books that I used to read were by Western fantasy authors. And whenever I wrote my own stories, my pixies did not seem like pixies. My elves seemed a little off. Something was always wrong. It didn't feel authentic to me. So I started writing more realistic or contemporary fiction. And it was not until I finished my first book, A Girl Like That, I began thinking, I want to do something different. I'm kind of bored with contemporary. So I started writing a science fiction dystopian novel set in a completely different world. And it was extremely horrible.
Oh
I mean,
no!
yeah, it was horrible. So, I mean, I really love the characters in that book, but the plot and the setting were both skeletal. It didn't work. So I put that aside and I started writing my second book, The Beauty of the Moment. And then when that was done, I was like, okay, what do I do now? And then I went back to the old sci-fi book and I thought to myself, what if I do something different and change the setting to something that is more inspired by India, and more specifically medieval India, which was a historical period that I was obsessed with as a teenager. I also, realized that sci-fi was not my thing. I was not doing it well. So I said, okay, I'm going to change things around and use magic, because that's something that really drew me. And I read a lot of fantasy. So as I began writing, everything began falling into place. It was as if a door had unlocked and a whole world was waiting for me behind it. All I needed to do was embrace my culture and also write in the genre that scared me the most.
So, Haunted by the Sky is essentially this dystopian novel rejigged in a fantasy world.
Yeah. Mostly, I think of it more of as a dystopia and at the same time a historical fantasy, because a lot of the times, the sort of fantasy that I am used to reading, especially the fantasy that comes out of India, is a lot of mythology retellings.
Mhm.
And I really enjoy those. But at the same time, I was thinking to myself, what if someone did something that was more like the Game of Thrones, which is not necessarily a retelling, but it's sort of inspired by Tudor history
Mhm.
and the Wars of the Roses and things like that. So I was thinking, we have a hell of a lot of history in India that is worth exploring and is worth excavating and looking for. So I began reading a lot of Mughal and Rajput history. I started looking into more primary sources like Ain Akbari by Abul Fazl Mubarak, who was one of Emperor Akbar's courtiers, and I began reading into the administration and how they were working things out. I also started reading the Arthashastra by Kautilya, which was very difficult, first of all. Okay, it was very complicated. So I took some ideas from there as well. But mostly as I began reading and writing, I realized that a lot of the ideas that I had, that I wanted to show Indian women wielding weapons and doing magic and being real badasses. And I really wanted to do that. And I realized that a lot of Indian women throughout history have been badasses, and only their stories have been relegated to footnotes rather than being on the main page of a book. And in this case, for me, Dr. Ruby Lal's book on Noor Jahan, Empress, was really, really helpful. I also discovered the Attingal Ranis of Kerala through Manu Pillai's book, The Ivory Throne. And I thought to myself, oh my God, these are such amazing warrior women and women with political ambition. And I thought to myself, yeah, the women of Umber, which was my fantasy kingdom, should also have such women. And so, it kind of, the research and the writing, it flowed naturally, and that's very rare when it happens. So I knew I had something good on my hands.
I love that when that happens. It's like a click in your brain, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like it starts pouring out. Can you tell us a little bit your background, Tanaz? You were born in India, I know, and then you've lived abroad ever since.
Yes, so I was born in Mumbai, and when I was very young, my parents and I moved to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where we lived for about 10 years, and then to Jeddah, where we lived for about 5 years. And then when I turned 16, we immigrated to Canada, and I've been living here ever since. I was studying to be a CA, as
Goodness.
all yes, as all South Asian parents' dreams are. Either doctor, lawyer, engineer, or accountant. Either one of those dreams. So I was doing a BCom, and I've completed my degree. But when I was in my final year and I was going through all these CA firms, networking sessions, I was not feeling really happy with what I was doing. So I had a conversation with my parents, and I said that, I will be a CA if you want me to be a CA, but then I'll write books. So my dad was like, why are you going through this then? Just do what you want to do. So
it's nice of you to offer, though.
Yeah, I just gave them, okay, you want me to get the degree, I'll get it for you. But
the question is, were you a good CA?
Was I a good CA? I mean, I never actually did this.
Right,
I never went through it, but my BCom GPA was like 3.93 out of 4.
Ooh.
So yeah, so
I was lost a talent.
I was a very good student. I don't think I would have been a very good accountant, but I was a very good student. I was an A student, which is why, my parents were kind of pushing me into that direction. And I actually like the fact that I did it because it does help me with my day job, which is in an export company, so imports and exports. Because honestly, writing doesn't pay the bills right now. I would really love for it to pay the bills, but it doesn't. So yeah, the life of a full-time
I know.
writer and exporter. So, but I still have that opportunity of waking up at 5 in the morning and maybe writing for 2 hours and then going and doing my work. But I'm still doing both of these things, and I'm happy that I'm actually writing because that puts me in a really good headspace, and I'm able to face the world with a more positive state of mind.
I have so many follow-up questions. I'm not quite sure which direction to go in. So first I go back to background for like 5 seconds and ask if did you travel to India a lot before you wrote this?
I used
Because
to
I
travel,
mean,
yeah.
I noticed, I feel a lot of it was Rajasthan, right?
Yes.
It was,
Yes.
there was all those
Yeah.
forts, the desert landscape, all of that.
Absolutely. Rajasthan was a huge inspiration. Gujarat, Maharashtra, the western states, they were a huge inspiration. But Rajasthan definitely in terms of the palaces and, the setting itself, which was really drawing me in. Because I remember being in history class and being completely, enthralled by stories about the Rajputs and the Mughals and the Marathas. And I was like, I really want to bring in those beautiful palaces and all the courts and the intrigue. And I just want to add a lot of stuff to it and magic. And so that's why I researched a little bit about, how the forts were constructed and sort of even the way Amber Fort was constructed was sort of inspired by Mehrangarh in Jaipur. So I was in Jodhpur, sorry, not Jaipur, Jodhpur. And
I was imagining that the entire time.
Yeah. And this is why I'm so excited to be here at this festival because I really wanted to go to Jaipur because Rani Mahal in Amber Fort is inspired by Hawa Mahal. So I was like, I was just literally imagining those places when I was writing. And so, yeah, I really loved the whole setting of Rajasthan and I wanted to bring it in, but in a more fantasy and more, magical way.
Can you walk us a bit through your word building process? Did you have a notebook in which you were taking notes? Did you use Post-it and put them everywhere? How did you do it? I love this little map, by the way. This map is great. So I just want to show the camera this map. Did you draw this?
I drew a much untidier version of this, but yes, absolutely, I did. And the illustrator Shreya Gupta, I believe, she did an amazing job of translating the map for the book. But yeah, I definitely drew the map. So what I did first was that when I was writing, I actually drew a map simultaneously, and I drew the whole realm of Swapnalok with all the 4 kingdoms. And it's basically a continent. So it's not the subcontinent, but it's an actual continent called Bhumi, and we have like 2 other separate kingdoms, the Brimlands and Aman, and then you have Swapnalok, the 4 kingdoms, Ambar, Prithvi, Jwala, and Samudra. And Ambar was the main focus for this book. What ended up happening was that I initially had the idea of making this book a trilogy. However, it was purchased as a duology by my publisher, so I had to shrink everything down. And so now the focus was on Amber itself. And so in terms of the world building, I just I just let it happen as it was going, and then I would go back and fix things and change things around. So when I was building the world, I was really thinking about India as a whole and our history, because India was colonized by the British, and oftentimes when we read history, it's through that lens of colonization. So I had to, in essence, decolonize my imagination to figure out how a fantasy kingdom would be both similar to and different from a typical kingdom in 15th or 16th century Hindustan. Because at that time, India wasn't India the way we see it today. It was Hindustan, which was this, the borders were different, everything was different. And yeah, so it was like, I had to think about all those things. I had to think about the role of women, as we discussed a little bit earlier. I had to think about the culture, and I had to think about, whether this society would be more open and accepting to different kinds of love. And I thought to myself, I came across a couple of medieval poems where men were expressing their love to other men.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, yeah, it makes perfect sense that the kingdom of Umber would celebrate the love of two gay moon goddesses. So,
Yeah.
I started changing things around and just really playing with this world. And I thought to myself that, yeah, this makes a lot of sense when we look back at our history,
Mhm.
pre-colonial history. And that's what I was kind of drawing on for inspiration as well.
Right. I actually want to talk a little bit about sisterhood because it's so important to you. I know even your Instagram bio reads for fierce women, right? Is that what it
Yeah,
says?
I write books about fierce girls. That's my brand.
Exactly. Kavas is great, but the female friendships they really shine. I thought it was super feminist. I'm not going to spoiler it and give everything away, but I love that all the twists were feminist even. Um, but I realized that we mostly meet women. Did you set out to do that, or was it just something organic that happened as we go along?
So I set out to write, definitely, I set out to write a book where women were, supporting each other and they were fighting. Because honestly, when I started writing this, a part of my inspiration was history. And I was thinking about women like the Gulabi gang
Mhm.
in North India, these women. I was thinking, I really want to put in some warrior women into the book. And that's how, honestly, the Gulabi gang were an inspiration for the Sisterhood of the
I,
Golden
I
Lotus.
I saw that. Yeah.
And so I definitely had that as an inspiration. So Gul's name comes from the Gulabi gang, Gulab. And then I thought of, initially I was like, oh, every lady would have a name similar to a flower. So Juhi, Kali. And then Amira came from the sci-fi book. So she totally broke the rules there. So like, okay. And the reason I named her Amira means princess in Persian. And she keeps calling Gul princess mockingly, which is kind of funny, I thought. So I just kept putting in there. But yeah, sisterhood was important to me. And in terms of the twist happened organically. And it was funny because when I started reading back, I'd actually peppered in hints about that earlier on. So subconsciously, my mind already knew where it was going, but I did not realize it until I wrote it down. And that's when I'm like, oh God, that's happened, because the twist, if it doesn't surprise me as the writer, chances are the reader is not going to be surprised. So that's why I don't tend to plan out those twists in advance. I let them flow organically, because then it's like, okay, the element of surprise is really there. Because if you know it from the beginning, you always leave more of a hint than you should. So it's kind of tricky that way. But yeah, definitely, I wanted to write a book where women were fighting, they had political ambition, and yeah, absolutely.
I really enjoyed that about this. But I was wondering, since the setting is Indian and your main reader base is foreign, right?
Yes.
Were you worried about them not getting the context?
I've done that with my past two books as well. So I'm kind of now sort of immune to that, because, the thing is that I've always written for a more global audience. So I'm always writing for different audiences because I've grown up in three different parts of the world, right? So it's always like, okay, you know what, I always have that in the back of my head. At the end of the day, I am trying to write a story which is authentic to the culture that I'm from. And so I thought to myself, yeah, I'm going to put in some Hindi words, some Sanskrit words. I'm going to mix a little bit of Farsi in there. But at the same time, whenever I do introduce a foreign word, I almost instantly, through the context, explain that. I will not insta translate, because I think my readers are way smarter. They
I
can
hate when people do
understand.
that as well.
I,
He ate
I
a roti and unleavened bread. I'm like,
unleavened bread. Yeah, I know. Dal, lentils, it's just so redundant and repetitive, right? I didn't want to go the naan bread route, so I'm like, I'm not going to do that. And so that's why I said to myself, okay, I'm going to put in the foreign word, but I'm also going to give a little bit of an explanation for those who are looking, and also a glossary at the end, because I do realize that my reader base needs to understand. And at the same time, not everyone in India speaks Hindi. So it's like, even for them, it's helpful. So I think to myself is that, yeah, in fantasy realms, people tend to read all these made up languages, but the minute you put a real language in, people get scared or intimidated somehow. And I don't think they
Yeah.
should be. I don't think they should be at all. So, but overall, I've had a very positive response from my
I
readers.
mean, maybe it's the future. I know that lots of books based on African myths are very popular these days. So maybe Indian myths are the next big global trend. We don't know,
Hopefully,
right?
yes.
But I was reading related to this. I saw an interview in which you mentioned that with your first two books, the publishers thought that since you were writing about a Saudi Muslim woman, you should be Saudi and Muslim yourself, and you had a hard time convincing publishers to take you on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the funny thing is that so my main character was a Zoroastrian, half Hindu, and she was Indian, and they couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that a foreigner could be living in Saudi Arabia and practicing a different faith. So they had a really hard time understanding. They're like, oh, the market won't get it, and you're not Saudi, so and you're not Muslim, so they won't get it. And I'm like, they won't get it because you are still pigeonholing authors to write the same kind of story. They will get it, and readers did get it. In fact, teenagers loved it. And they were like, oh, what does this mean? What does that mean? And they really liked it, and they liked the fact there was a glossary at the back. They looked stuff up. I think teen readers are so amazing in that sense, is that they like to learn stuff. They like to find out new things. And one of my earliest reviews for Hunted by the Sky was by this 13-year-old teenage reader who was white, and she said, I really love this book. Will there be more romance in the next one? She was really enjoying it. And it was like, she wasn't complaining to me about the language that I used or anything. It's usually the adult readers who are complaining that you're using too many words. Maybe kids won't understand. Kids get it. You have the problem.
Yeah, it is a problem being stereotyped, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
You might always be the diverse voice, not just like mainstream fantasy, but you know what I mean.
Yep, absolutely. You do have that, there's this sense of being pigeonholed sometimes because, whenever you're asked to a panel, it's usually to a quote unquote diversity panel, or, it's usually that's what's happening.
The token woman sometimes.
Oh, yes. So we're always tokens. But the thing is that nowadays, I think for this particular book, I have been lucky in a sense that at least about 60% of my panels have been about fantasy and world building. So very few of them have been just about diversity and whether or not diverse people should be allowed to write fantasy stories and stuff like that. So it's been a really refreshing change. And mostly people just ask me questions about how you build the world and what are your tips for writing and craft, and that's what I really like to do.
So you've gone over these questions before then.
Yep.
What I wanted to ask next was about mythology, actually, because I noticed in the author's note, again, I'm holding up the book to the camera so everyone can see it, by the sky. You said that you used a mix of Parsi and Indian myths, right? Could you mention them? Could you name them?
So basically what I did was that I did not want Hunted by the Sky to be a retelling of mythology because that's been done before by better authors. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to play a little bit and use existing mythology as a base to create my own myth. So one of them, the most obvious ones, is the Rekha in the book, which was inspired by the Lakshman Rekha, and I was kind of subverting that a little bit. And then I was also looking into the Shahnama when it came to creating other magical creatures in my book, and I don't want to go too much into detail because it might be a spoiler, but yes, I was definitely looking at the Shahnama in terms of those myths and everything. But other myths like the one about the moon goddesses like Suneri and Neel, those one came out of my imagination. And I was also, honestly, I was reading the Mahabharata, I was reading the Ramayana, I was thinking about ancient India in general and how family lineages were traced back to the sun or the moon, like Suryavanshi or Chandravanshi. And I have a character in the book who traces her lineage back to one of the moon goddesses, and she's part of the Chand Gharana. So it was like I was kind of mixing things out. So it was not, I would not say that it's a true mythology retelling or a true inspiration, but it's definitely mythology, existing mythology, Hindu and Persian, play a huge role in me defining my own myths.
So have you always wanted to write YA?
Actually, I fell into YA by accident. I started writing for adults because for the longest time, I thought that if I'd write a book about teenagers set in Saudi Arabia, nobody would want to read it because that's what I used to see in the teenage market. It's usually the book is about a white girl having a romance with a white boy, and that was it. That was my teenage years. Whenever I went there, teen novels were always about that or about sparkly vampires. But other than that, there was nothing else that was about kids like myself. So I thought to myself, in the adult realm, at least there is some hope over there because you have a lot of books by other authors who are already doing really well. And so I thought to myself, okay, I'll write a short story collection about teenagers set in Saudi Arabia. The short story collection didn't sell, so publisher said, write a novel. I changed things around and I wrote a novel. Again, they had problems with it. They're like, oh, this is too dark. This is not working. Why do these characters have to die from the beginning of the story and stuff like that? So I still wanted to keep submitting the book. And my agent had an idea and she said, you know what, let's try out the YA market because there are so many teenagers in your book. An editor at Macmillan really liked it. And she had a conversation with me on the phone and she said, would you rewrite this for teenagers? I said, yeah, okay, if you can handle the fact that both of them die from the beginning. She said, I love that part. I said, okay, let's do it.
Spoiler.
Not really.
Well, okay, yeah, not really a spoiler. Okay.
Not really a spoiler. If a girl like that, they both die from the very beginning. But the thing is that it is really odd that a book that adults considered too dark ended up in the hands of teenagers. But this is what happened, and this was my journey to end up in the teen market. And the funny thing is, I thought, okay, this would be my first book, and then the next book would be for adults. For some reason, I wanted to still write for teenagers. Third book, same thing. I ended up writing for teenagers. I'm still writing for teenagers right now. Until I, run out of those stories, I think I'll still continue to write for teens.
And that's great. In India, at least, the perception is that writing for kids is somehow like less than. Like kids books don't get that much attention. YA authors are not really that well known. And I know it's different in the West. Have you found that you have a really good, thriving community?
In terms of the West, definitely YA books are doing really well because adults are reading them too. Because not every adult wants to read adult novels. There are lots of them who are reading the Hunger Games. Kids books or young adult books. And the thing is that young adult books are now exploring a lot of complex topics that adult books are not doing. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in YA that would really shock most adults. And is this really for teens? Yeah, because teens are reading this stuff. Teens like it when we write honestly. They don't want a sugar-coated reality. Because as a teenager, I was reading adult fiction. I was 15 years old and I was looking for stuff to read because I felt that, teen books are a bit too, simple and they never really show the real world. So I was reading adult books. So, now we have to reflect the reality that teens are facing these days. So especially in the West, you have to think about these things all the time. And even in India, I think teens are ready for this and they're going through all these complications in life. And so I don't think we should discount teen readers and teen fiction.
I agree. Which brings me to the J.K. Rowling in the room. How much
who must not be named.
Exactly. How much do YA authors owe their readers? Do you have to have lessons in there, or is it okay to just have plot?
I think you owe your readers the best story you can tell. I think for me, it's all about the story. I'm always telling a story. I'm not really looking for necessarily message art because that's not something that I do, but I am looking for a story and I'm looking for ways in which I can explain a character. So even if the character is not likable, a reader should be able to understand that why are they behaving in this particular way, and then they can put their own moral compass on this, whether it's right or wrong. And yes, we do have a responsibility in some ways because teens are a little more impressionable compared to, adults. So yeah, you do think about these things and you think about, what you're putting in your book, whether or not it's going to be harmful to them. You think about that a lot more, definitely a lot more when you're writing teen fiction. But I think now, the same is the case for adult fiction. Adult writers are also becoming more conscious of what they're putting in their books, whether or not they're being unnecessarily triggering by just adding stuff there, which is not necessary. And in terms of the J.K. Rowling, I guess, she came out recently with a book that people have called transphobic. It's on the New York Times bestseller list. So if authors owe their readers a good story and responsibly researched story, then readers owe it to themselves to make better choices with their books. And if you don't support J.K. Rowling's stance on trans people, then go out and support trans authors. There are many out there. There are two examples I can give you right now: Vivek Shreya and Meredith Russo. Go out and support these authors, because if you berate an author for their unacceptable views but still reward them monetarily by purchasing their books, you're not really holding them accountable to anything.
Which brings me very nicely to, can you give us a reading list?
A reading list?
Or tell me what your inspirations were growing up or now.
Growing up.
Or life inspirations.
Life inspiration. Okay, reading list. I'll give you my three favorites. Anything by Rohinton Mistry.
I love Arundhati Mystery.
Yes, I totally adore him. He was
isn't he in Canada as well?
Yes, he is.
You should go meet him.
I wish. I wish. I think he's like the J.D. Salinger of our community. He's very reclusive, but he's amazing. And he was one of my biggest inspirations, because his Tales from Firozshabad, the short story collection, was what inspired me to write my short story collection about, with Parsi characters and stuff like that. And that was him. And then Khaled Hosseini. Anything that he has written is absolutely amazing. I love his books. Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things. I remember picking up that book when I was 16 years old, and I thought to myself, oh my God, that book just blew my mind, because it showed me how English could be written in a very Indian way. And I thought to myself, yeah, okay. So, this is something that I totally relate to. And yeah, absolutely. Those are three of my favorites.
And what did you read for YA inspiration? Kids books.
YA kids books? I read a lot of R.L. Stine, as I mentioned. So Fear Street Sagas, all those. I totally love the horror aspect. Now I can't read horror. I get too scared. But I used to love it back then. I also read a lot of Sweet Valley. Now I read the Sweet Valley Snark blog.
Oh, what's that called? I must read it.
It's actually, I think it's called Sweet Valley Snark. I think if you just Google it, you'll find it.
You have done me a great service today, Tanaz.
Yeah, you should read it. It's like it's about our favorite doormat, Elizabeth Wakefield, and everybody's favorite sociopath, Jessica Wakefield. So they just call them that in the book.
My God,
blog. They call them that. So it's really, really hilarious, and it's like, if you have nothing better to do, you can just sit and read all the recaps.
Done. That's my weekend.
That's your weekend. You'll have an amazing time. And so I used to read a lot of Sweet Valley as well, and I used to really enjoy it. That back then I was like, oh, this is so fun, because you're living in Saudi Arabia and all these American kids doing crazy things. It's like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So yeah, that was my teenage reading list. Not very proper, but yeah, here you go.
And what's next?
What's next? I'm working on something new right now. It's right now in the teeth pulling phase, as I call it. It's right, everywhere I go, I find a cavity, if we'll continue the dental metaphor. Plot holes, that means. But yeah, I'm working on something new right now. I can't talk too much about it because it's still in the writing phase, which is pretty nebulous, so it can go anywhere.
Good luck.
Thank you.
We have got a lot of questions, so I should dive right into that. Parijita asks, how has your writing style evolved and developed between writing books, poetry, and writing screenplays? Is there a conscious effort in differing the styles? Have you written screenplays?
Nope. I'm actually a very bad poet. I'm actually a very bad poet. So in terms of my style evolving, I think I'm a lot more conscious about what I put in there now in terms of the way I write, because initially when I was when I just started writing, I would make a lot of mistakes and not really notice them. But now when I start writing, if I have something, a turn of phrase that's like kind of like it's a cliche or something, I'll cancel it right off the bat. I'll work on that line first before moving forward. So it's like the more you write, the more practiced you get. So I guess I'm more conscious about the mistakes I used to make in the past. In
Mm.
terms of my style evolving, I'm a little more confident, I guess, in certain ways, that I don't worry too much about, a certain word. Oh my God, it's not the perfect thing. I just like, okay, let me just move on. I'll fix it later. So I'm a little more confident in that sense.
Well, you have to be confident 5 o'clock in the morning, right? I'm just, my brain is just like exploding with that factoid. All right, Arnika asks, you mentioned J.K. Rowling. Is it not important to separate the author from their art? While it is very disappointing to see her comments online recently, I'm finding it very hard to dislike the Harry Potter series on the basis of my disappointment towards her real-world beliefs.
Well, that's a really good point, and I've also struggled with that because in terms of not just J.K. Rowling's comment, it's also about your own political stances, personal. Recently, after the George Floyd incident happened, and there was a huge outpour on social media for the Black Lives Matter movement, and I posted something on Instagram to support Black Lives Matter, and I lost like 15 followers in one day, and I was like, okay, I don't care, because at the end of the day, I'm standing for something I believe in. So yes, I do agree that J.K. Rowling's personal opinions are her own. But when you're holding an author accountable, and you're saying that you're holding an author accountable, then maybe as a reader you should hold yourself accountable as well and make better choices. And that's what I think of it myself, that if I am also a huge fan of the Harry Potter series because I grew up on that series. But now I think about it and I think to myself that can I make some good choices in terms of her future books? So you can love the books for what they are and what they mean to you. I still do love them, I'm not going to lie about it. But am I going to read her future books about the detective and all that? No, not really. I'm not going to support that. So it's really up to you and what choices you make as well as a reader.
Yeah, sad though. Ashish asks, your latest novel, Haunted by the Sky, takes place in Amber. I'm just going to get down to the questions, a lot of like notes. What came first, the setting or the story? And also, can you tell us a little bit about your research process?
So I think
because he says the kingdom is a character, which is true.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. They both came together in a sense because the story, the basic Lou's story, like the first sentence was already there. They come for us in the night and shoot my father through the skull. So that sentence was already there. It was just a matter of the setting being right. And so I guess they both came sort of at the same time. And as I mentioned, I drew the map as I was writing, and that's what was happening. In terms of the research process, I did do quite a bit of primary research. I also looked up fiction, historical nonfiction, and I read a lot of books by Ruby Lal, William Dalrymple. I also read books by Abraham Irali, who wrote a lot about Mughal India, and so quite a lot of research on that end. And I was kind of seeing how the research fit into the fantasy world, because the thing is that sometimes when your book is too research heavy, you lose the magic element or the fantasy element. So sometimes when I would become too realistic in terms of the weapons that they were using, and I'm like, oh no, I'm losing the fantasy element, so I'd have to put the magic back in. So it was kind of a flip-flop or a balancing act for me especially.
I find that as well with a lot of historical fantasy. It's like there's sometimes a data dump, and then you're sort of brought out of the story suddenly,
Yeah.
Agastya asks, in a girl like that, one of your characters, Zareen, experiences both online and physical bullying. What do you think that the effect that online bullying, which many people are going through in this age of Corona era, has on the mental health of not only teens but also adults today?
I think it's actually worse right now because, a lot of what we do is online. And even before the pandemic, now it's especially heightened, but even before the pandemic, more and more teens were spending lesser time outside and more time online. And, I was listening to all these stories about, 11 and 12-year-olds having panic disorders, and it's because of online bullying and things like that. So I think it's really it's necessary to have some security measures in place to protect kids who are going through this, and also to spend less time online and more time outside if you can, especially if you're able to during this pandemic. If you live in a country where you're allowed to go out for a walk or things like that safely, you should try and do that, or just try to do, or just shut your computer, put down your phone, and do something like coloring or art, because that's what we used to do back in the 90s. We didn't have computers, so we just read books, an actual book, versus things like that. And I think, yeah, it's become worse, and I think we need more measures to protect the kids.
I agree. Ria asks, could you suggest some books other than yours which follow the same fantasy theme? I personally love the theme and would like to read more on this Indian context.
Okay, so I have Tasha Suri's Empire of Sand. That's the Mughal-ish inspired fantasy, and she has another book out in the same, I think, series. So I think both are standalone, but they follow the same universe. So I'm actually reading the second one. I can't remember the name right now, but I'm really into her books. And then Swati Tirdhala's A Tiger at Midnight, and she had her next book just come out, Archer at Dawn. So those are two books that definitely you should look into if you're into the Indian fantasy inspired settings.
I think I can go back to my own follow-up question, because there's a slowdown on the question answer section.
Okay.
Which is, what's it like to promote a book during COVID, which, kind of like online? You must have had a lot planned for this, and digital events must work though to reach out to a wide audience, right?
I think in some ways they do work. I think because, especially globally, because I'm able to do this event right now, wherein, before the pandemic, I don't know if I would have been able to travel either. So, in terms of the work and everything. So, I am definitely able to reach out more globally to people, which is really fantastic. In some ways, it's a little more difficult because I can't do any more signings personally. It's really tough. So that's the one thing that I miss, meeting people face to face and listening to them and stuff like that, because teens tend to be pretty shy, and they'll just like keep watching you from a distance, and then they'll come and then they'll get you to sign the book, and then they'll quietly tell you something. So that's something that I kind of miss. But yeah, I mean, we're adjusting as best as we can. The pandemic hit everyone hard, and we're just taking it in our stride and pivoting and just doing our best.
Yeah, we're dear. But we have time for, I think, another two questions. I've got one here. Was it difficult to write from a teenage perspective, especially with themes such as racism and casteism, which are very sensitive? How did you ensure the voice was authentic?
That's a great question. So, in terms of a teenage perspective, I typically, when I write, I'm not really thinking that I'm writing from the perspective of a teenager. I am thinking about this, okay, this is the person, this is who they are, and this is the historical and political context that they're surrounded by. I also think about their family life, what their upbringing was, what it's like. And then when I start thinking about, the age and everything, because I think in terms of writing an authentic character, you have to think about their life experiences and what they're surrounded by and what this person would react to, like based on what they've faced. So I think just by trying to be as careful as possible with your research is very, very important. And when you're talking about race and caste and sensitive issues like that, and also get, if you're worried, you get a sensitivity reader to look into the book and tell you if something is wrong with it. I think it's perfectly natural. If you don't have an expertise in horses, you get someone who has an expertise in horses to look at your book, but you have problems, getting someone to look at your book from a perspective of race and caste and things like that. That's a problem. So as authors, we have to really think about that. If we feel that, okay, this needs to be looked at a little bit more, we get someone else to look at it and give their opinion. And at the end of the day, maybe that will help, maybe that won't. Maybe you will find some other errors. Your readers will point out, oh no, you missed this or you missed that, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, you can only, as an author, put out the best book that you possibly can. Then what happens when you learn something new, you take that in and then you apply that to the next book, because every book that you write is going to be imperfect. All books have mistakes in them, all books have problems. So at the end, how you react to what you're given and how you apply that to future books is also important.
Okay. All right. We have time for one last quick question, which is, has migration inspired you to write? Ask Kamya. Did moving help you?
Oh, that's a great question. Migration definitely inspired me to write because I'm always, in one sense, I always feel like an outsider. So I'm always looking from the perspective of an outsider. And so, in one way, I'm always observing all the time because I never feel that I quite fit into any particular place. And that kind of helps me sometimes blend in or pretend to blend in. On my good days, I feel like I belong everywhere. On my bad days, I feel like I belong nowhere. But it does help to write because you get all those feelings out on paper, and then that makes for a good story sometimes.
Okay. Do we have time for any more? Time out. Finished. Thank you, Tanaz, for talking to me. And this is such fun.
Thank you. This was amazing.
Thanks all for watching us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi Reddy Madhavan and Tanaz. Tanaz, the fascinating thing I think about Canada especially is, I know this, it's sort of a story that I was told that a stand-up sort of stood at the corner somewhere in mid-city in Toronto with a turban and started speaking, and people kept coming up. And the question that he asked was, where do you think I'm from? And everybody sort of said Markham or Mississauga or Brampton or York or whatever. And nobody ever sort of questioned the fact in terms of, if you were to do it anywhere else, they would say Afghanistan or, India or wherever. So I think that's quite fascinating in the way that Canada has been able to assimilate and be able to have people from across the world without too much of the stress of being a migrant, because everybody there is a migrant. But thank you both. That was really fascinating.
We had fun.
Yeah,
amazing.
fun. And I'm going to pick up the book and read. Hey,
You must. It's really good.
a warrior woman, a badass warrior woman. Way to go. Thank you so much, Meenakshi. Thank you, Tanaz.
Thanks
Thank
for
you all
having me.
for
Thank
watching
you.
and being such a great audience. I'm sorry we couldn't post all the questions. We just ran out of time. But if there are specific ones that you still absolutely need answered, then we will send them out to Tanaz, who is waiting to get to a bookshop to start signing all over again. Sooner than later, hopefully, this too shall happen. A reminder to all of you to block 4th of October for I Believe Art Matters, an advocacy fundraiser for artists and artisans who've been decimated by COVID-19, who've lost all their earnings and they're literally on the streets. I Believe Art Matters is being hosted by Shabana Azmi and Manoj Bajpai, and features dance, music, theater, comedy, and with all the greats, everybody from A.R. Rahman and Kailash Kher, Shekhar Rafgiani, Shillong Chamber Choir, Amit Trivedi, Indian Ocean, Aditi Mangaldas, Papa CJ, Malavika Sarukai, and over 450 artists. So do catch it on Teamwork's page on Facebook and on YouTube. And of course, we hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we'll log back on at 8:30 p.m. for our next session on JLF's Brave New World, from page to stage and beyond. Kartika Nair in conversation with Jay Arjun Singh. Jay Arjun Singh and Kartika Nair discuss journeys from book to performance and celluloid in their favorite adaptations, particularly of epics, in many ways, the continuation of the conversation we've had right now. See you at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time.